The Honourable, the Member for the District of Bonavista.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour for me to rise here today and give my maiden speech as a relatively new MHA for the historic district of Bonavista. Being an MHA is a lifelong dream of mine that came true on the evening of November 30th, 2015, and was fully realised on December 18th, 2015, when I was sworn in along with 39 others here today. I'm going to start with a little story, and I hope we get a chuckle out of it, but my maiden speech is certainly not going to hold a candle to the member from Fogo, Cape Frios. I think that was quite this maiden speech. Growing up, I was a Sea Cadet, and I'll talk about that further in my speech. After I finished my time as a cadet, I decided I'd help my Corps whenever I was available because I was going to MUN at the time. Anyway, in the spring of 2000, RCSCC Golden Hind had their annual ceremonial review in Carolina. I was feeling pretty good about myself, wearing a beautiful blue suit. I got to get that out there for my friends across the floor. That my parents purchased for me for my cousin's wedding 2 years prior. And I was waiting for the event to start. One of my friends who volunteered with the Corps, Dexter Hicks, was always known for a sarcastic remark or some put down. All in good fun, of course. Figuring that I would get some sort of put down or insult, I decided to get ahead of it by saying to Dexter, "It's amazing what a cheap suit and a shower can do for a man." His only response was, "Yes, Kingy boy, I suppose." Thinking I dodged a bullet, I had a conversation with Mrs. Jean Elliott, who was a president of the Naval League, who I had known for many years as a cadet. Mrs. Elliott asked me what I was up to these days, and before I could get the words out of my mouth, Dexter said, "King's a salesman for cheap suits." So here I am, 16 years later, still wearing a cheap suit, but instead of selling them, I'm representing my district in the House and trying to sell my constituents on legislation and government policy. I probably should have been a haberdasher. Growing up, I lived in Catalina, Trinity Bay, which is where I currently reside. Catalina, when I was young, was a very prosperous town until the collapse in the cod fishery in 1992. Almost immediately, you can see and feel the devastation that the cod moratorium had on mine and neighboring communities, which in some instances are still being felt today, 24 years later. We went from an economy where anyone who wanted full-time, year-round work at good pay and benefits could have it, to an economy where there are mainly seasonal jobs at minimum or lower income wages. This is the case for most of rural Newfoundland. After sitting on the sidelines, I decided 2 years ago that I wanted to become an MHA and try to make a difference in the lives in which I serve. As a youth, I attended Catalina Elementary and Discovery Collegiate in Bonavista. My interests included sports, mainly volleyball and hockey, the outdoors. Thanks to my Uncle Max, I became an avid fly fisherman, much like our Premier, and my Uncle Bruce, a moose hunter. Politics and student government, and Sea Cadets. Each of my 4 years at Discovery Collegiate, I served on student council, during which I was president while in grades 11 and 12. That's one of the reasons I got interested in politics, and I'll get into that interest in a moment. My biggest passion growing up was the Sea Cadets. Being a Sea Cadet with RCSCC number 84 Golden Hind, Catalina, I spent most of my free time for 5 years being active as I could within the Corps, becoming coxswain during my last year. As a cadet, I attended sailing camps in Cornwallis, Halifax, and St. John's, finishing as a sailing instructor with HMCS Avalon here on Kitty Vitty Lake in 1999. I had an opportunity to do seamanship training off the interior coast of British Columbia in Vancouver Island. I had an opportunity as well. Golden Hind received a trip to Plymouth and Bristol, England as part of the Cabot 500 celebrations in 1997. All of this led to a pretty good career with the Royal Canadian Navy. I'll discuss this after I speak to two very important people in my life. My parents have always been a big part of my life. Edward and Linda King are truly two remarkable people who provided me with a wonderful childhood. They've been there for me when times were tough, especially when I was battling with depression and anxiety a few years ago. And they have made countless sacrifices for me. Those sacrifices mainly come from my military deployments, including Afghanistan and Libya, where their fear and worry was probably a lot worse than what I was feeling. When in the theater of war, your primary focus is the task at hand, and as those left behind that patiently wait for an email or phone call to know that you're all right, pay the bills, and take care of all other things that we're unable to do. As a single guy and an only child, it was up to my parents to man the home front. A little over 2 years ago, I found it necessary to invite my parents to live with me in Halifax. My father had just had kidney failure and required dialysis 3 days a week. Knowing the hardships they faced by traveling over an hour from Catalina to Clarenville, I invited them to my home to ease their burden. That was all well and good for 6 months or so, but I had other plans, and my parents would have to make another sacrifice. I was going to get into politics and move back home to Catalina to seek the Liberal nod for Bonavista South. Thus, they would have to make the move back. Now, don't feel too bad for them. They were the ones who got me interested in politics. A few months after returning home, dialysis was open in Bonavista. Getting back to my interest in politics, in the early 90s, my parents were active volunteers and friends of former Trinity North MHA Doug Olford. I vividly remember the by-election in 1991, where I was 9 years old, going around knocking on doors and hanging out in campaign offices throughout the district. Once Doug got the victory on that cold February night, I was hooked on politics. As I mentioned, I was active in student politics in high school. I was also elected as VP Academic for the Marine Institute Student Union for the 2003-2004 academic year, often fighting with tooth and nail against MHA's administration on numerous issues. I'm probably one of the most unlikely MHAs to sit in the legislature here today. At a recent social event, our education minister said to me, "Neil, tell me how you did it." What he was referring to is the fact that when I announced I would seek the Liberal nomination on July 28, 2014, I was living in Halifax and was a relative unknown to most constituents in the old Bonavista South District and within the Newfoundland Labrador Liberal Party. I wasn't on anyone's radar. No one was courting me. What I did bring to the table was a strong work ethic, an ability to relate and make connections with people, in over 20 years around party politics. I held several positions with my local federal and provincial Liberal District Associations in Nova Scotia, being president of the Halifax Atlantic District Association during the NSLP rise to government in 2013. What I gained most from this time was campaigning on both losing and winning campaigns, both in Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia. You learn quite a bit on the hustings, and I brought that to my own campaign. My proudest moment prior to my own election was the evening of October 8, 2013, when we helped get my friend and mentor, Brendan McGuire, elected as MLA in Nova Scotia. Anyway, I've gotten off topic a little bit, but that's what politicians like to do, get off track and talk about themselves. During the initial Bonavista South nomination, there were 5 of us seeking the nod. Pretty hard odds to overcome. However, based on my campaign experience, I put together a strong team, knocked on every door in the district, and got out to as many events as possible that I could raise my profile and make myself accessible. I still do this today because I truly believe that an MHA must be available for his or her constituents. At that point, I had signed up over 2,200 supporters. However, a day before our nomination was called, our former Premier, who gained the position by a couple hundred delegates in a ballroom at the Delta, decided he had the mandate to conduct electoral reform and try to save his party's skin. And we all know how that worked out. Anyway, so that delayed our nomination, and the newly minted District of Bonavista was formed which took in all of the old Bonavista South District, as well as parts of Trinity North and Terra Nova. I took a short break to recharge, going on a trip with my friends to Montreal to see my beloved Habs. After that, I was hard at it again for the next 6 months, and on July 9th, I had won the Liberal nomination in the District of Bonavista, gaining over 65% of the vote against 2 other competitors. The work didn't stop there. My team grew, and I grew as a person because you are truly affected by those you meet on the campaign trail. That paid off on November 30th when I was elected as first MHA in the District of Bonavista, defeating 3 other candidates, including the incumbent MHA. I won that evening with 67% of the vote, but that's not a direct result of me. That is a direct result of my campaign team and volunteers. Words cannot express how deeply thankful I am for your hard work and dedication. I will do my best not to let you down. So everyone has a career before becoming an MHA. I'm no different. My friend from Placentia West Bellevue is the same as well. He had one. I proudly served as a Marine Systems Engineering Officer in the Royal Canadian Navy for 14 years. My path to being a naval officer is almost as unlikely as my path to politics. In high school, I had given some thought to a career in the Canadian Forces by applying for the Regular Officer Training Plan, ROTP, which would pay for my university degree with a 5-year commitment to the military afterwards. I went to see my guidance counselor, and he told me not to waste my time because applying because I would more than likely not get accepted, so I didn't. I applied for engineering at Mon and got accepted in the fall of 1999. In January of 2000, I headed to the recruiting center in St. John's for a cadet officer interview. I wanted to help out my old corps and earn a few bucks teaching sailing at cadet camp in the summer. I sat down with the recruiting officer, and he looked at my high school marks, my extracurricular activities, and the fact that I was taking engineering in university, and proceeded to ask me if I heard of ROTP. I told him about my high school guidance counselor story, and the recruiter asked for his name, and I'm sure he gave the counselor an earful. He told me to consider the interview a formality, and less than 6 months later, was accepted to the highly competitive Regular Officer Training Plan. Given the length of my engineering program, I had to change it to fulfill the obligations of my contract, so I completed the Diploma of Marine Engineering Technology at the Marine Institute in 2003 and a Bachelor of Technology from Mon in 2004. In January 2005, I moved to Halifax and my career in the Navy took off. That included training in Esquimalt, Halifax, and Portsmouth, England. I had shipboard postings to Her Majesty Canadian ships Fredericton, Halifax, Charlottetown, Montreal, and St. John's. The St. John's is where I finished my career in October 2014 as head of department for the Marine Systems Engineering Department, months away from being promoted to Lieutenant Commander. I had shore-based postings at the Canadian Forces Naval Engineering School, Fleet Maintenance Facility, and engineering operations within Maritime Forces Atlantic. I have several people which helped me through my naval career, and I feel that I should mention them. These people include Dave Hooper, Pete LaBelle, Jean-Francois Seguin, Brad Pilley, Mark Brake, Bob Steve, and Bob Jones. The highlight of my career, which formed a lot of my perspective that I have here today, is my deployments. I have been deployed to West Africa and Caribbean for counter-drug operations in 2006 and 2007, the coast of Libya for Op Unified Protector in 2011, and to Afghanistan in 2009-10. My deployment to Afghanistan was truly remarkable because I was a naval officer, and I never thought in a million years that I would end up there because it's a landlocked country. Boy, was I wrong. Usually when you get called up to the commander's office, you're in trouble. However, I couldn't think of anything that I did wrong, and I just got an excellent performance review. On July 2nd, 2009, I got called up to Commander Bob Jones' office. He broke the news to me that one of my colleagues did not make it past his pre-deployment screening, and the fleet maintenance facility would have to provide another officer, and that officer was me. I quickly got sent to Kingston, Ontario for 3 weeks of training, and on September 16, 2009, was on my way to Afghanistan as the interpreter manager for Regional Command South in Kandahar. Being in charge of the interpreters was like herding cats at the best of times. When everyone wanted their services, but there were limited numbers with appropriate qualifications to do different classifications of work. It wasn't the easiest thing to do when you had to tell a higher ranking officer that they couldn't immediately have interpreter services because there was a higher priority. This was especially true for senior British staff officers. To them, their task was the most important, even when others were more pressing matters. As well, they didn't like to be told no by a colonial Navy lieutenant. And Dr. Hagee knows what I'm talking about. The good thing is my boss and mentor, Aussie Colonel David Stanley, always had my back. He would say, "Slick, call me that because I won't speed my poker. Don't worry about it, you're doing a good job." Two things stand out to me most about Afghanistan. The first is the ramp ceremonies, which everyone attends when the soldier that was killed begins his or her journey home. The first day I arrived in theatre, I attended a ramp ceremony for Corporal Jonathan Joseph Sylvain Couturier. There would be 10 other Canadian soldiers who would be killed over the next 6 months, as well as countless others from allied countries. They never get easier, and I often thought and still think about their families that they left behind. The second thing that stood out was how little people actually have. At the end of my tour, my replacement was in theatre early, so I had an opportunity to do some mentoring with the Afghan National Army. A couple of times a week, I would head from Kandahar Airfield, where I was based, along with a few others, and drive the 2 kilometers down to Camp Hero. Although only a 10-minute drive and a couple kilometer journey, it was very telling as to how Afghan people live. There was no big houses or condos, grocery stores or department stores. They lived in buildings that were very, very modest, to say the least. They bought their goods from little roadside vendors. While working with the ANA, I had an opportunity to talk to their sergeant major, who was like me, was 28 at the time. I asked him what his goal in the Army was, and he told me that he wanted to be a sergeant major in the Helmand province, which he could have had if he paid the bribe. However, he refused, and it gave me faith that some great leaders going forward in Afghanistan. I have one final thing to share about my military career before I finish off my maiden speech. I'm spending some time on my district, and I'm getting a little short on time. While deployed with HMC at Charlottetown off the coast of Libya in the city of Misrata, the crew recognized the Battle of the Atlantic with a service on the flight deck. This was done the first Sunday of each May to remember Canadian sailors and ships that were lost during World War II. As each name of the ship was being read and the bell rang in remembrance, I could hear the bombs exploding in the background. This was the most surreal moment of my life, as we're remembering those who lost their lives during World War II. There was Libyans losing theirs at that very moment. Afghanistan and Libya gave me my perspective that I have today, and that things aren't always as bad as what they seem. Sure, things could always be better, but until you experience places where people have absolutely nothing and constantly fear for their lives, you don't realize how fortunate we are to live where we are. As I wind down my speech, I want to address my district. To the district of Bonavista, and I usually preface this with historic. I'm blessed to live in a district that I called home growing up. We've had some ups, and it seems like for the past few years we've had more downs. But what's always great about my district is the people that live there. I believe that the district of Bonavista is a great place too, and has the potential to grow and be so much more. We've seen this over the past year as we've seen significant growth in our population, seen many new businesses start and grow, and have seen unprecedented investment from the private sector and from government. When John Cabot landed in Cape Bonavista in 1497, he tossed a basket off the Matthew and pulled it up full of cod. I believe that the fisheries is our past, is our present, and will be our future. This fall is a great example of the return of the cod fishery, where fishers are able to catch 2,500 pounds per week, and many today are still at it. As we see crab and shrimp decline and our cod stocks grow, we must work with all stakeholders to ensure that we have the appropriate balance in our fishery. The Bonavista Peninsula has always had a great agriculture and forestry sectors, and I have and will continue to go to bat to ensure that we grow these sectors to their full potential. We have learned that this province that we cannot put our eggs into one basket and expect it to be sustainable. The fishery, agriculture, and forestry are three ways in my district where smart investment will help us diversify. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the tourism industry in the District of Bonavista, which I believe is second to none. This past season was a banner year for tourism in our region, and next year looks to be just as good.
Order, please. I leave. Continue.
Okay. Couple more sentences, Madam Speaker. This past season was a banner year. Oh, excuse me, just read that. I've got a bit with the MHA for Lewisport Twillingate about who would have better numbers, and I think I'll win that dinner. As MHA, I believe that we need to continue to invest in this sector. We need to work with local stakeholders, the people on the ground, and give them not just the resources, but the tools to provide long-term stability and growth. I was at a conference this past summer, and I was explaining my district to some other attendees. When I started to think about what I was telling them, it all of a sudden hit me that I'm one lucky MHA to represent the district which I serve. Most people pay thousands of dollars to visit. I have it for free by living there. For that, I am truly thankful and fortunate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.